Thank you for your time today. I'm really looking forward to this session. Always excited to talk to our Korean counterparts and always looking forward to deepening that strategic relationship with such an important partner in the Indo-Pacific region and a partner with who we already have enormous cultural, economic and strategic ties, and which we really want to build on. My presentation will do two things today. First is to cover some probably very uncontroversial ground that most of the people in this seminar are aware of around the global market for critical minerals and the critical technologies that are helping us to achieve a low carbon or zero carbon future. And secondly, and probably more importantly, of interest to this group, the Australian government's position on where we see Australia playing a really constructive role regionally and globally in that space, and what we're doing from a policy perspective to support the growth of our critical minerals sector, and what that might mean for Korean companies and others who are looking to partner with Australian projects to create those absolutely crucial supply chains for the technologies of the future. So without further ado, we might move to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So, whether it's the IEA or any of the ratings agencies or the various kind of market analysts out there, the couple of key messages coming out of the market for low emissions technologies and for other critical technologies that rely on critical minerals is that just absolutely staggering forecast growth in these markets over the next 5, 10, 20 years, to the point where current investment in a range of these minerals is insufficient to support the demand that we can see coming, and colleagues from S&P before made that case very clearly, although obviously nuances there depending on which mineral you're talking about. Layered over the top of that, we have this issue of supply chain concentration that, of course, Korean companies will be acutely aware of, and no better time than coming out of COVID, where there has been a heightened focus on supply chain security, than to act on those concerns and to ensure that there is some level of diversification and that the market works on a broad base of many sources of supply, many sources of value-added processing, and many sources of assembly and high-end manufacturing. Australia is, has an enormous contribution to make in this space, as does Korea, as do our partners Japan, the US, EU member states, and others. But Australia's particular offering to the market here comes in several forms. First and foremost, we have fantastic commercially viable geological endowments of many of the minerals that other countries need. Lithium, cobalt as well, not obviously to the extent of the DRC, nickel, copper, vanadium, a range of other minerals, rare earths as well, all of which are highly sought after, for permanent magnets, for lithium-ion batteries, and for other emerging battery technologies, as well as high-performance alloys. We would really, we have an exceptional resources sector in Australia that is globally renowned for supplying reliably, competitively, and sustainably sourced products such as iron ore, with logistics chains that span the world. And we really want to expand that into these minerals and technologies of the future and grow our critical minerals sector. We look to do that in an environment where there is a very supportive, stable and trusted government regulatory framework that wants to see the sector grow, that welcomes foreign investment, particularly from like-minded countries like Korea, and that provides that stable climate with good sustainability safeguards, good labour safeguards, good governance safeguards that mean that you're doing business with a trusted partner on every level. So that is a fundamental value proposition. But to go one step further, we are not just looking at this, and when I say we, I mean the government, we're not just looking at this solely through an economic development lens. Critical minerals and the technologies that they fuel are absolutely crucial for the needs of our partners, both economically, militarily, strategically, in every sense. And so it's impossible to look at this industry without appreciating the geopolitical benefits of fostering those business-to-business ties with countries like Korea, Japan, the US, India, and others. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. And you'll see that thinking writ large here, where you look at some of the minerals that we have on our critical minerals list. They're largely developed or assigned that ranking of critical based on the needs of our partner countries. What are the minerals and the inputs that those countries need to continue to fuel their sovereign capabilities and supply into the markets that they want. So lithium-ion batteries, steel, things like that are of enormous importance to Korea as our permanent magnets. And we really want to kind of find a way to supply those in the most efficient way possible and build on those existing relationships. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I won't dwell too long on this. This is a story that's largely been told and retold and captures that first point, that demand and supply are heading to a looming imbalance here, that these absolutely astronomical growth rates, it's worth noting, are driven in many ways by macroeconomic, global trends on one sense, but also by policies and politics around climate change and the move to low emissions technologies in other space. And I, for one, and the Australian government welcome what we see as an incredible ramping up of momentum towards this move towards net zero economies. We think that those settings are here to stay. And the one on the right, the graph on the right there, just indicates that depending on the technologies, there are specific opportunities within these growth curves to supply into global markets. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. The next couple of slides are going to get to the meat of the presentation in terms of what the Australian government is doing from a policy perspective to help with the growth of this sector. This slide really just tends to indicate that we have a focus on growing our sector that is based on 3 pillars on the left there. The first is on a detailed granular knowledge and interaction and engagement with the more than 300 critical minerals projects in the Australian landscape. Of course, they are at all stages of development, from planning right through to commissioning. But we make it our business to have really close relationships with the private sector in that sense, to understand their projects, to be able to speak with confidence about where those projects are up to, about the challenges that they face, about where government can potentially step in to assist. And for a range of those projects, we engage regularly through our colleagues at Austrade and Department of Foreign Affairs with the Korean market to help answer queries and to help connect buyers and sellers. Secondly, in the middle there, we have a range of initiatives to enable the sector. Those go from everything from project finance through to broad research and development support, the commissioning of industrial hubs to help achieve scale and reduce overheads, and through to trade facilitation, as I've already mentioned. And then finally, on the right of that little figure is the crucial piece here, international engagement. The government has a relentless focus not only on building its pipeline of quality projects, but on connecting that to the global market, on looking for those opportunities for Australia to capture the parts of the supply chain that provide good value for Australia and that play to our intrinsic benefits, but that connect perfectly in a win-win situation with other countries like Korea, where we can provide things like value-added processed battery minerals or rare earth oxides and carbonates, and even potentially alloys into existing Korean capabilities and help fuel their ambitions for growth and to capture increasing market share, and to really provide that seamless back-to-back integrated supply chain that helps to diversify what is currently a very globally concentrated market. And to that extent, and again, I would acknowledge the enormous work of my colleagues in Korea from Austrade, working with the sector both in Australia and Korea. We have really welcomed recent moves by major Korean firms to invest in Australian companies to secure new supplies. POSCO gets a particular mention here with its work taking a stake in First Quantum Minerals. Its moves to diversify the spheronized graphite supply chains globally, and of course Korean companies of all walks looking to move into the rare earths market, into nickel and cobalt through QPM, and through a range of other companies where there are active discussions underway, but which are not yet ready to be revealed to the market. That warms my heart. That is our day job. That's very pleasing. We want to see more of that. To enable that, government sometimes has to step in and help these projects to overcome a range of market risks that you don't have to deal with in a normal market, where you're not dealing with 90% or more of the supply chain being controlled by certain countries. There is a strong case here, because that is the situation we're dealing with. There is a strong case for the Australian government to step in and to assist getting projects off the ground. We do that through several ways. You'll see that first point under government support there lists 3 different Australian government financing agencies, basically government banks, each with a slightly different mandate and a slightly different focus, but all very active in the critical minerals space. Those who may have been attuned to recent releases in this space will note that earlier this week, the Australian government, in addition to existing arrangements, has just created a brand new $2 billion Australian dollar critical minerals facility under our export finance agency, which is the first of those 3 financing agencies solely dedicated to supporting critical minerals projects. Our vision for that is that Australian government can be a cornerstone investor in many of these projects, but only at the point where they've gone through rigorous commercial due diligence and that we are satisfied that they are a strong project and a strong contention for the market. And at that point, we'd be looking to crowd in finance from the private sector and from other governments, potentially looking to partners like Korea, like Japan, like the US and India and others, to step in and join us in establishing these new supply chains. In addition to financing for mature projects, we also have named critical minerals as one of our 6 national manufacturing priority sectors, all of which will receive a share of $1.3 billion of government grants, particularly targeted at early and mid-stage projects seeking to overcome the many steps needed to bring a project to market. There are other mechanisms as well, such as major project status, which we can grant to projects of national significance at a very early stage when they're looking to get a streamlined pathway through the various regulations that apply to projects. We make no secret and we have no shame about the fact that Australia has very stringent environmental, social and governance controls on developments. That is a strength of the Australian market. It's the strength of Australian offerings to market. However, we don't want that to ever become something that delays projects unnecessarily. And so major project status is a tool we have there to streamline that process and ensure important projects move through that as quick as possible without compromising their environmental credentials. If we could please have the next slide. Thank you. So this is my second last slide, and after this I'll do a brief wrap up. But in addition to the project financing initiatives that I spoke to on the previous slide, it's worth highlighting that our policy support goes the full project life cycle and across a range of fields. Briefly going through from top to bottom, we have 3 science agencies, national science agencies in Australia, the CSIRO, the Australian Nuclear Science Technology Organisation and Geoscience Australia, that work in close collaboration with our other research institutions such as universities, with the private sector and with state and territory governments to really deploy cutting edge research development and IP and techniques to help projects overcome technical barriers and get to market. That can include everything from optical sorting on crushing and screening operations to help massively boost the productivity operation, through to advanced chemical refining and processing for rare earths to ensure we extract with an as efficient a process as possible the valuable things like neodymium, praseodymium, and get them to market. The recent publication from the CSIRO was the Critical Energy Minerals Roadmap, which provides an excellent summary of where Australia sees its opportunities, and which I would commend to Korean companies and any officials who wish to understand where we're focusing our attention. I mentioned the second point already, which is working with our state and territory governments to set up industrial hubs and precincts. The idea there being that with catalytic investment in shared infrastructure, we can bring multiple critical mineral projects online at scale with lower cost and bring in foreign investment in an area where the investors can be confident that there is critical mass to keep those projects operating efficiently. The third and semi-final point to make is about better communicating to market our existing very high ethical, social and governance standards, environmental standards as well. There is a scheme that the Australian government is working with states and territories to develop to better showcase that to the world, and it includes our recent grants around using blockchain technologies to provide provenance and assurance to customers that they are in fact getting the quality product that they wish to purchase. And finally, Australia is active internationally through the International Standards Organization to ensure that there's a level playing field that projects can compete on, and where environmental externalities, for example, are not swept under the rug. We were bold in setting up a strategic advisory group under the ISO to help ensure that the ISO focused strategically on gaps in critical minerals standardization and conformance. And that SAG process is well underway, chaired by Australia, and I think is about 6 months away from concluding its batch of work and recommendations. That brings us to our final slide and the conclusion of my presentation. Brilliant, thank you so much. So in summary, we're seeking to work with like-mindeds to position Australia as a major provider of these crucial materials to the world. We provide competitive, reliable and sustainable sources of this market, so we want to work with Korea, both at the government and the business level, to stand up these projects and supply chains. And to that end, I would be very happy after this, working offline with colleagues, to set up any kind of follow-up sessions, perhaps jointly with my office and with Austrade, with Korean companies who wish to know more on any of these aspects. We'd be very happy to discuss further. With that, Chair, thank you. I'll conclude my presentation.